Imagine a golden dawn on the banks of the Nile. The sun begins to rise behind the palm trees and illuminate the ancient stone temples, while people still rub their eyes at the smell of fresh bread in the air. Suddenly, messengers pass through the streets of Thebes, shouting news that would change everything. A woman has become pharaoh. If you found this story intriguing, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and comment below with what you already know about the pharaohs of Egypt. Believe me, this story will amaze you from beginning to end, and it begins with the first woman to officially hold Egypt's most powerful title, pharaoh. Her name was Sobekneferu, and she didn't want to be remembered merely as the daughter or sister of kings. No, she wanted to rule, but not as queen consort. She wanted the throne in its entirety. She didn't accept the role society reserved for women of her time. She went beyond that, and to achieve that, it wasn't enough to have nobility in her blood. She needed courage, strategy, and something else that only she seemed to possess. Sobekneferu didn't just take the throne. She demanded to be treated as pharaoh, a title previously reserved for men. Unlike other powerful women who came before but ruled as regents, or in the shadow of kings, Sobekneferu broke that mold. She was the first woman recorded in the Egyptian royal lists as a full sovereign. Her name appeared with the full royal titles, the same ones used by her male predecessors. This was such a milestone that it echoed for millennia. And the most curious thing, she didn't hide her feminine identity. She was a woman and a pharaoh at the same time. But how did she come to the throne? Where did this woman come from, who dared to confront a world ruled by men? And why is her name linked to that of a crocodile god? Sobekneferu didn't appear out of nowhere. She was the daughter of one of the greatest kings of Middle Egypt, Amenemhat III, a pharaoh who not only expanded the kingdom's borders, but also left his mark with gigantic works and an enviable administration. Amenemhat III was the kind of king who knew that power wasn't maintained by armies alone. He built canals, strengthened the cultivation of crops around the El Famum oasis, and transformed the region into a granary that fed all of Egypt. He was admired as a just, strong king, and very close to the gods, a true titan. Sobekneferu grew up in this environment, amid monumental temples, priests, scribes, and powerful politicians. She was no ordinary princess, dressed only in silk and surrounded by perfumes. She observed, she learned. Every step her father took, every decision he made, was a silent lesson for the young woman who would one day step where no female foot had trod before, the pharaoh's throne. But fate, as always, had its own plans. Amenemhat III died after a long reign, and the one who took the throne was Sobekneferu's brother, or half-brother. Amenemhat III, however, he too had a short reign, and died without heir. Egypt then found itself at an impasse. Without a direct successor, who would assume the throne? Nobles and priests debated, and political chaos threatened to knock at the door. And it was there, in that power vacuum, that Sobekneferu emerged as an unexpected and necessary possibility. But what did she face to become pharaoh in a male-dominated Egypt? How was a woman accepted or forced to be accepted into the highest office in the empire? Egypt was restless. The people still mourned the death of Amenemhat III, and before the country could recover, Amenemhat IV, the heir apparent, also departed, leaving the throne without direct heirs. It was as if Egypt had lost its bearings. The throne, once a symbol of stability, now seemed an empty throne surrounded by doubts, disputes, and the fear of collapse. At this delicate moment, when many expected power to be disputed by nobles or usurped by some ambitious general, an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows of the palace corridors. A woman. Not as consort, not as regent, but as legitimate pharaoh. Sobekneferu, when she presented herself as sovereign, did not find a united Egypt waiting for her with open arms. On the contrary, she faced a conservative elite, a nobility accustomed to male kings, and a society that did not even consider that a woman could wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. But it was precisely this crisis that paved the way. Sobekneferu. She used instability as an opportunity. She showed that, unlike any other suitor, she was of royal blood, daughter of Amenemhat III, sister of Amenemhat IV, raised in the palace, educated in the same principles as any prince. She was the bridge between the glorious past and a possible future. And so, amidst the turmoil, she was crowned Pharaoh, a woman assuming the most sacred and powerful office in Egypt. She knew her reign would have to be much more than symbolic. She would need to prove, with every decree, every temple, every ritual before the gods, that she was worthy of the pharaoh's throne. But if you think she wore flowing dresses and delicate jewelry and power, you're wrong. Being a woman in ancient Egypt was already a challenge. But being a woman and a pharaoh, that required more than courage. It required transformation. Sobekneferu understood from the beginning that to be respected as a sovereign, she would need to dominate not only the throne, but also the image of power. And in that era, power had a male face. That's why when we look at the visual records and titles left by Sobekneferu, we notice something fascinating. She chose to incorporate elements of the masculine pharaonic aesthetic without erasing her feminine identity. It was a delicate and bold balance. In statues, on temple walls, in fragments of inscriptions, we see representations where Sobekneferu, she wears the traditional pharaoh's kilt, a short skirt that represented military and divine authority. In some records, she also appears with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the Heka scepter, and the Nekaka whip, all symbols of her dominion over the people and her direct connection with the gods. But most interestingly, she didn't try to hide that she was a woman. In many images, the female body, the facial features, the bust, is there, visible. She didn't disguise herself as a man, as some popular legends like to simplify. She built something new. She said, "In essence, I am a woman, and I am a pharaoh, and that's not a contradiction." This gesture was political, strategic, brilliant. She knew that the Egyptian people were deeply traditionalist and visual. The pharaoh's image was more than aesthetic, it was a channel to the divine. So by adopting part of the masculine look, she connected to the symbolism of millennia of pharaonic authority. But by maintaining her feminine features and identity, she also affirmed something unprecedented. Egypt could now be ruled by a woman without the world stopping to turn. And it worked. She was accepted into the royal lists. Her name was inscribed among the kings. And her reign was treated not as a scandal, but as a firm response to the power vacuum. But why was she called Sobekneferu? What was so special about this name that linked her image to a crocodile-headed deity? And how did this name help cement her authority? In ancient Egypt, names weren't just names. They carried power, destiny, and a direct connection to the gods. So when Sobekneferu chose her throne name, she didn't do it by accident. She called herself the beauty of Sobek, or in ancient Egyptian, Sobekneferu. Sobek, the crocodile god, was a powerful and ambiguous deity. He represented both protection and fertility, as well as brute strength and the chaos of the wild waters. He was especially worshipped in the El Fayum region, where the Nile branched into canals and marshes, and where Sobekneferu's father, Amenemhat III, had undertaken grandiose irrigation and cultivation projects. It was a sacred, fertile place, deeply linked to Egypt's survival, and the god Sobek reigned there as lord of the waters and guardian of the borders. By uniting his name with this deity, Sobekneferu made a powerful political and spiritual move. She was saying to the people and the priests, "I am chosen, protected and legitimized by Sobek," and that made all the difference in a world where royalty was understood as a reflection of divine order on earth. More than that, by aligning herself with a masculine warrior deity, she reinforced her image as a sovereign capable of dominating wild forces, ruling with authority, but also nurturing and protecting the people, as the goddess Isis would do. It was as if, in her name, masculine and feminine, strength and beauty, government and fertility coexisted, everything in Egypt in crisis needed. Furthermore, the name Sobekneferu rescued and reinforced the kingdom's religious identity at a time when maintaining the support of temples and priests was essential. In times of transition and political fragility, having the gods on one side was not only desirable, it was a matter of survival on the throne. And in fact, it survived, it governed, it ordered construction, it legislated. 4 years, that was how long Sobekneferu remained on the throne of Egypt. At first glance, It may seem short, but when it comes to a reign that took place during one of the most delicate periods in Egyptian history, that short time was enough to make history and to be remembered millennia later. Between approximately 1806 BC and 1802 BC, Sobekneferu faced what many kings would fear: the pressure of holding the empire together, with an uncertain succession, internal tensions, and a people accustomed to the idea that the throne was reserved for men. It was like walking on a rope bridge stretched across a river full of crocodiles. Literally, if we remember his connection to Sobek. But she walked steadily. Despite the short time, Sobekneferu, he continued projects left by his father, especially in the El Fayum region, where hydraulic systems guaranteed life to the crops and stability to the people. He invested in religious works, strengthened ties with the temples, and kept the empire's administrative machinery functioning, which, considering the political chaos that threatened the throne, was already a monumental victory. Above all, she maintained order. During her reign, Egypt was not invaded, did not fragment, and did not plunge into civil war. This alone demonstrates how stabilizing her presence was. Ruling in a time of peace is difficult. Ruling in the midst of turmoil, as the first female pharaoh in history, and still maintaining the country as a whole, is something few can do. But like a fire that burns brightly for a short time, her reign was suddenly cut short. There are many theories about what happened. Did she die suddenly? Was she assassinated? Did she die of natural causes? Or was she simply unable to maintain power due to internal pressures? The truth is that, after her death, Egypt entered a political decline, ushering in the so-called Second Intermediate Period, a time of disorder and rival kingdoms. It's curious to think, a woman ascended the throne and held the empire together. When she fell, everything collapsed. But how do we know all this? What remains of her legacy that Egyptologists recognize her as a real ruler and not a footnote in the history of kings? Sobekneferu's name carved in monumental letters. She left no colossal temples or gloriously inscribed obelisks like the more famous pharaohs who came before and after. But then, how do we know she existed? That she ruled, that she left her mark? The answer lies between the lines of history, in the records that escaped the erosion of time and were rescued by attentive archaeologists. Sobekneferu may have reigned briefly, but his name was never forgotten. She appears in official royal lists such as the Abydos King List and the Saqqara King List, which were records used to keep the lineage of the pharaohs in order, almost like a certificate of divine legitimacy. These lists did not include regents or usurpers. To be there, the pharaoh had to be recognized as legitimate, and there she was, among the kings, with all the royal titles. Furthermore, her name has also been found on administrative seals, statue fragments, and temple inscriptions. Not much? Yes, but enough to reconstruct her presence and confirm that she was treated as a pharaoh in every sense, and not as a passing exception. The most fascinating thing is to realize that the absence of grand monuments may not have been due to a lack of ambition, but rather to the delicate times in which she governed. With the country unstable and resources focused on maintaining order, there was neither time nor conditions for grand architectural projects. She seems to have prioritized stability over vanity, and yet millennia later, when many kings had been forgotten, Sobekneferu's name continued to intrigue scholars. After all, how did a woman manage not only to assume the throne, but also to be remembered for generations? And what's more, did she simply maintain what already existed? Or did she also build, create, and leave something visible on the soil of Egypt? Sobekneferu's name. But that doesn't mean she passed the throne in silence. On the contrary, she built, expanded, and completed works that remain part of the mysteries of ancient Egypt today. Sobekneferu understood that, in Egypt, the pharaoh was not just a political ruler, he was the link between the gods and the people, and a pharaoh who didn't build, who didn't leave his mark in stone and sand, was like a scribe who never wrote invisible to eternity. Therefore, even with limited time and resources, she insisted on continuing the legacy of her father, Amenemhat III, especially in a region that was seen as the fertile heart of Egypt, El Fayum. This oasis, surrounded by canals, lagoons, and arable fields, was a symbol of abundance and a connection with the god Sobek, the same god who inspired Sobekneferu's name. She restored temples, completed hydraulic works begun by her father, and according to archaeological evidence, expanded ceremonial structures. One of the sites most associated with her name is the Hawara Labyrinth, a monumental construction attributed to Amenemhat III, but likely completed or modified by Sobekneferu. Ancient Greek historians, such as Herodotus, described the labyrinth as more impressive than any pyramid, with thousands of corridors and secret rooms. Furthermore, fragments found in temples in Thebes and Heliopolis reveal that she also commissioned statues and small chapels where her name appears with the full titles of Pharaoh. Further proof that she didn't limit herself to a symbolic role. She wanted to be seen, recorded, engraved in stone. The most interesting thing is to see how Sobekneferu she knew how to balance tradition and innovation. She didn't destroy what came before, she completed, enhanced, and perfected it, as if to say to the people, yes, I am different, but I came to continue the order of the world. Yet, despite her works, her name, and her efforts, Sobekneferu's reign did not last long. After her death, Egypt entered a new era, and she left no heirs. This raises another important question. Would other women follow in her footsteps? Or was she a lone spark in a world still closed to female power? If today we remember names like Hatshepsut, Cleopatra, or even the little-known Queen Tauset, it's because way back when, Sobekneferu dared to be the first. She opened a door that had long been locked from the inside, and that changed everything. Before her, there had been influential women in Egypt. Yes, some queen mothers, regents, powerful consorts, but none had officially used the 5 royal names of the pharaohs, nor ruled as a sovereign monarch. Sobekneferu was the first to say, with actions and symbols, I am not here to guard the throne until a man is ready. The throne is mine. This attitude had consequences. Even if Egypt didn't immediately embrace female power as a rule, the precedent was set. The gods didn't curse Egypt because of a female pharaoh. The Nile continued to flow. The harvests continued, and perhaps most importantly, the people didn't rebel against her. About 3 centuries later, another woman would occupy the throne, and this time, with more time and resources to build her monumental legacy. Her name? Hatshepsut. But before Hatshepsut dared to don the false beard of the kings and have her image carved in the temples of Karnak, Sobekneferu had already done so, quietly, but firmly. She demonstrated that it wasn't necessary to be a man to rule as pharaoh. That power could take different forms. That the titles, rituals, and symbols of kingship could be adapted without breaking divine order. This changed future perceptions of what a woman could or couldn't do. Later, other women would also approach the throne with more freedom, some as regents, others as rightful pharaohs, like the aforementioned Tauset in the 19th dynasty, and of course the famous Cleopatra VII, who despite reigning many centuries later, also needed to use a hybrid image of power, both feminine and regal. But Sobekneferu was the seed, the first brave one, the one who planted a tree called possibility in the desert of prejudice. However, even with such a strong mark on history, Sobekneferu's trajectory is still full of gaps. And one of them is the great question that intrigues historians to this day. Did she come to the throne through merit or political expediency? Was she accepted or merely tolerated? When we think of a pharaoh ascending to the throne, it's easy to imagine a grand ceremony, priests invoking the gods, crowds cheering, but in Sobekneferu's case the coronation may have taken place in silence, or amid whispers and suspicious glances. That's because, to this day, no one knows for sure whether she assumed the throne as the legitimate heir, as a provisional regent, or as a strategic usurper. And this uncertainty is what makes her story all the more fascinating. Let's get to the facts. Her brother, or half-brother, Amenemhat V, died childless. The throne was vacant. The dynasty was threatened with extinction, and it was into this power vacuum that Sobekneferu emerged, with royal blood running through her veins, but not originally created to rule, at least, not officially. Some scholars believe she was appointed regent simply to maintain stability until a male heir could be found. Others suggest she saw the opportunity and seized it with political savvy, perhaps backed by a court faction that preferred her to keep her in power, rather than see Egypt descend into civil war. But there are also those who say she may have been forced onto the throne, not by her own will, but by national necessity. The country needed someone with authority to prevent collapse, and she, as the daughter of Amenemhat III, granddaughter of pharaohs, educated in the rites and codes of the throne, was the perfect piece to fit into the puzzle of the crisis. This ambiguity is what makes her rise so intriguing. Because regardless of how she came to the throne, the fact remains, she established herself as pharaoh. She used her titles, ruled autonomously, and left no room for doubt in her records. She was the sovereign of Egypt. But this also raises another question. Why did she never marry? Why did she have no children or a direct successor? Was this a choice? Or was it a condition imposed to prevent her from establishing a new female dynasty? In ancient Egypt, royal marriage was much more than an emotional alliance. It was a political ploy, a ritual of legitimization, a way to ensure heirs' continuity and stability. Therefore, when a pharaoh, male or female, ascended the throne, they were expected to marry and have children to extend the royal line. But Sobekneferu broke that pattern. She never married, and she left no registered children, no crown prince, no crown princess, no sign of an extended dynasty. This in itself would be unusual, but considering her unique position as the first official female pharaoh in history, the decision or imposition not to marry takes on even greater weight. Why? Some scholars believe she chose not to marry to maintain power in her own hands. After all, in a male-dominated world, a husband could be seen as the true ruler, even if he were merely a consort. Marriage could open the door for the throne to be usurped by male influence, so perhaps remaining single was an act of protection and affirmation. Other theories suggest that the court may have prohibited this marriage, precisely to prevent her from founding a new dynasty based on female blood. This would show that even as pharaoh, Sobekneferu still faced limits imposed by patriarchal tradition. The fact is that without an heir, his reign was the last of the powerful 12th dynasty, a cycle of kings that had lasted more than 2 centuries and that had known great prosperity, especially under the rule of his father Amenemhat III. When Sobekneferu died, there was no one ready to assume the throne with real legitimacy. And so what began with gold and glory ended in silence and shadow. But what exactly happened after her death? How did Egypt react to the loss of its last legitimate ruler? And why did her death mark the end of an entire era? Sobekneferu rose like a star in times of darkness. And like many stars that shine brightly, she disappeared as suddenly as she appeared. Her demise remains, to this day, one of the greatest mysteries in ancient Egyptian history. There are no accurate records of her death, no confirmed tomb, no grand inscriptions recounting her final days. As was customary among the pharaohs, it's as if she had vanished from history. And that in itself is revealing. There are several theories. Some Egyptologists believe she died of natural causes, perhaps from illness. Others suggest she may have been assassinated, or even removed from power due to political pressure, perhaps by those who never truly accepted the idea of a woman on the throne. But what is known for certain is after her death, Egypt went into freefall. Sobekneferu, gone and without a royal heir to the throne, the 12th dynasty came to an end. What followed was the second intermediate period, an era of instability, short-lived kings, internal conflicts, and foreign invasions, such as the Hyksos, who would come to dominate part of Egypt. It's impressive to think that while she was on the throne, Egypt remained in balance. But as soon as she left the scene, the structure cracked. This reinforces a powerful idea. Even though many doubted her, because she was a woman, she held an empire in her hands. And when her hands closed forever, the void that remained was impossible to ignore. Her tomb remains unknown. Some archaeologists believe she was buried in one of the chambers of Amenemhat III's complex at Hawara. Others say her tomb was destroyed or erased on purpose, as an attempt to rewrite history and erase the boldness of a woman on the throne. But even though we don't have her grave, we have something even more powerful: her memory, and she endured. At the heart of Egyptian civilization lay an unwritten but deeply ingrained rule. The throne belonged to men. Pharaohs were, in essence, living representatives of the gods. And these gods almost always had male faces. The figure of the king was associated with cosmic order, military power, and the voice of the gods in the mortal world. And then came Sobekneferu. She didn't just occupy the throne, she challenged centuries of tradition. Imagine what it was like to enter the royal palace, to sit on the throne, where only men sat, dressing in traditionally masculine royal symbols, without erasing her identity as a woman. This wasn't just bold, it was revolutionary. Sobekneferu had to prove her legitimacy, not once, but every day of her reign. Every decree she signed, every ritual she led, every public appearance, all were a reminder that she stood where no other female body had dared to stand so firmly, and she knew it. Therefore, she carefully constructed her image. She blended the symbols of regal masculinity with her own femininity. She wore a crown, a scepter, and the titles of kings, but she didn't hide her feminine form. She was the authority, but also the exception, and this balance required political intelligence, self-confidence, and an unbreakable will. But this came at a cost. Sobekneferu, by breaking the rules, found herself isolated, without a husband, without children, without a successor, and perhaps without many allies. Ruling as a woman required her to be tough, unquestioning, even cold. She could not make mistakes, she could not hesitate. Any weakness would be seen as proof that a woman should not rule. And yet, she ruled, with firmness, with vision, with strategy. She was the kind of leader who didn't wait to be accepted. She asserted herself, and even after centuries of trying to erase her, time vindicated her. Today, she is remembered, studied, and revered for being the first to challenge the impossible and prove that yes, a woman could be Pharaoh. But her face, her image, can we recognize her today? Are there statues, paintings, or remains that show what she looked like? Or has time been cruel to her visual memory? If you search the world's museums today for a statue with a face clearly identified as Sobekneferu, you'll encounter a disappointment. Her image has nearly disappeared from history. Unlike Cleopatra, who appears on coins, or Hatshepsut, whose temples still echo her power, Sobekneferu is a phantom presence. The few representations we have of her are fragmentary. Some statues are incomplete, with feminine features but accompanied by masculine titles and insignia. Other images show the body as undefined, almost neutral, as if the artists were trying to balance or hide the fact that they were sculpting a woman with the attributes of a king. It's as if even the artists of the time were unsure how to portray her. And perhaps this hesitation says more than any completed sculpture. She was a figure who broke the mold, and the Egyptian artistic style, extremely codified and conservative, didn't quite know how to handle that. But history has a curious way of rescuing those who have been left aside. In recent centuries, especially since the 20th century, modern artists have begun to draw inspiration from Sobekneferu. Paintings, illustrations, and contemporary sculptures, many reimagine her appearance with intense eyes, noble features, and garments that blend feminine delicacy with the rigidity of pharaonic symbols. She became a visual symbol of duality and power, an image that provokes, causing discomfort and fascination at the same time. After all, how do you represent someone who defied everything, including the very aesthetics of the throne? In exhibitions, films, graphics, in novels, and even in digital art, Sobekneferu has been portrayed as an icon of feminine strength, as an archetype of leadership, who doesn't need to completely masculinize herself to be respected. Her image has become freer today than in antiquity itself. But perhaps the greatest portrait of all is her memory, a woman whose tomb was not preserved, whose faces were broken or erased, but who still survived the test of time as a symbol. Today, when we look back amidst the ancient ruins of Egypt, the fragmented pyre, the worn walls of the temples, there she is, Sobekneferu, not as a forgotten shadow, but as a beacon that shone before its right time. She didn't need a colossal pyramid to be eternal. Her courage was the monument. At a time when women were kept in the shadows of power, she stepped into the spotlight. She assumed the throne without asking permission. She donned the symbols of power, not to hide, but to demonstrate that the Egyptian throne could also have a female form. And mind you, this wasn't an isolated act, done on impulse. It was a strategic, calculated, courageous decision. She took command of an empire in crisis, stabilized the country, protected the lineage, and kept the tradition alive, all without the support of a king at her side. She was both king and queen, the staff and the scales, the sword and the voice. Today, her name inspires historians, artists, writers, and dreamers. She is studied in universities, celebrated in women's empowerment movements, and rediscovered as what she always was, a pioneer. Sobekneferu represents the possibility of the impossible. She is a reminder that power has no gender, it has competence, vision, and courage, and that even when history tries to erase certain voices, those voices end up echoing louder over time. So the next time you hear about pharaohs, remember, not all of them wore false beards, not all of them were men, and one of them, the first of them all, faced the world with the eyes of a woman and the heart of a queen. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who also needs to know this incredible woman named Sobekneferu. Comment below, do you think she was forgotten on purpose, or was she just waiting for the world to be ready to hear her?